Camera's rolling.
You okay with that?
Sure. For me, money has a profound impact on people's lives. So not just for them and their family, but it has an impact on the community, it has a generational impact. So if you improve someone's financial lives, it has this huge ripple effect.
Frankly, financial education, financial literacy, financial well-being is a critically important component of an individual's overall health and well-being. So in theory, it should be a public good. Everyone ought to have access to financial advice, but of course they don't.
I believe consumers should have access to quality and affordable financial advice, and it should be hygiene for a developed society. Much like quality internet, quality mobile phone, quality healthcare, I think we are there as a society, so it should actually be a hygiene factor.
It doesn't matter whether you have $1, $1,000 or $1 million. You know, you deserve to have the opportunity to just lean into the life of your choice, whatever that choice is.
We all have an obligation to do that as an industry, to think about that greater need or that greater good. People deserve that.
So what we know is that when a consumer gets financial advice, they're far better off than if they try to make their own decisions throughout their whole life by themselves.
We know there's plenty of evidence to show that advice adds value to people at all stages of their life, and I think it's important for us as a country to give people the ability to benefit from that.
We've done a lot of research on what the value of advice is, and there's two fundamental pieces to that. And the first is behavioural, and it really looks at the way in which people feel about their lives. People who have advice are much more confident about their future. It doesn't really matter how much money they have. It really matters how much they can understand what their future is going to look like and how much they can operate inside those constraints. The second part is financial. There's a couple of things which are really important to understand about people who do have advice. The first is that they tend to retire early and of their own volition, which is really important. Most people don't. The second thing is that they tend to retire wealthier, and it's because of those simple metrics like deferred pleasures and good investment choices along the way.
You know, the emotional result of financial advice starts with peace of mind. But to me, it goes well beyond that into freedom. When you feel relaxed about your finances, like, you know what, I've got this, then you're liberated. Then you make decisions you never would have made before because you've got that baseline sorted. You know, adulting failure is a real thing, and people feel very insecure about all of that. So to me, you know, financial advice can deliver that confidence to make choices.
Without good financial advice, people will make poor decisions. They'll make decisions for today rather than tomorrow. They might find themselves in a situation where they are unable to support themselves. They find themselves in a situation where their needs are compromised, or they're forced to rely on others or social security.
There is a market failure here in that consumers want a product that the industry seemingly wants to provide, but it can't provide at the right economic price point. And so we're in this crisis where legally the only industry that can provide this service is unable to do so.
And when we research consumers, the number one thing that comes up around why people don't access advice is affordability. And that's the perception from the consumer that they can't afford to actually access advice.
As we speak, our research shows there's about 2 million people in Australia who used to have an advisor or should have an advisor that are currently seeking advice. The most common story that we're getting from our database, and we've got about 200,000 Australians in our database, is that they can't find the advisor that they want. And the most common story that we're getting from good advisors at the moment is that they do not have capacity to take on new clients.
Yeah, so currently I think we now have less advisors than we do personal trainers in Australia. So that's concerning to me because personal trainers fill a particular need. Getting on top of your money is a lifetime need. My concern is that we're going to price out 90% of the Australian public.
If you look at the market or the demand for advice and the provision of advice, currently we've got a situation where a small percentage of Australians seek holistic advice from a regulated financial advisor. And it's becoming harder to get access to that service, but it's also becoming more expensive. So in effect, are we polarising or are we creating a have and a have-not situation? That doesn't seem to make sense when you think about our reason for being as an industry.
So how do we get that 20% up is related to how do we service better that group of less sophisticated clients who require more simple advice. And that requires a number of things. It requires a capital investment because to provide the innovation and the platforms and the technology and the client engagement and the products and the services to attract that sector and to service well that sector requires capital.
The current state of the market in financial advice, as somebody who talks with a lot of consumers week on week, is confusing.
Let's be honest at the moment, most consumers are bamboozled by the advice process.
So I think that this is one of the challenges, is that by making advice really difficult, we haven't only stopped consumers from getting the guidance that they need, we've also blocked large portions of the population from receiving financial products and from accessing financial products. Certainly I think it's important that we go back and we remember that 10 years ago when the FOFA debate was happening, there were very influential politicians and lobbyists and organisations who had the very clear goal of stopping Australians from going to see a financial advisor on the high street, and that's the outcome that we've now gotten, and I think people sort of forget that.
So one of the major challenges in getting advice out to more consumers has actually been, and we've seen it for a number of years, so you've heard the challenges around the production of advice. The cost of running an advice business is just exponentially continues to increase with the war on talent in that particular space.
The number one does seem to be cost. And so that either means that with the cost of living and with wages not rising, the target cohort, the millions of Australians who want this service, who need financial advice, simply can't afford it.
I think the reality is the biggest handbrake on getting access to advice is the regulatory overlay. The regulatory framework that has been in place for the last decade through the FOFA changes as well as more recent reforms have just put in place barriers that have prevented a lot of consumers from being able to get the advice they need when they need it at a price point that is acceptable to them.
The number one thing that we all are talking about is the layers of regulation, the layers of complexity around the laws and regulation and licensing that exist in our industry and that don't serve the consumer.
There's less people even wanting to get into financial advice, less students. So we're going to have to pay them more to attract them. Like the whole thing, unfortunately, is unwinding a little. And I think that's a big risk if we continue doing it the way we've done it.
As an industry, the industry was built predominantly by large institutional players that might have delivered advice as distribution or sales and built ecosystems that were about that vertically integrated model where advice and product were mixed together, or there might have been cross-subsidisation. And so the technology solutions were built to support that regime.
For a long, long time, data has been held on and tightly held on to, and people have not been able to connect system A to system B to create a better picture of the client. It's been the single biggest technology problem in the last 20 years, getting a single view of your client.
There needs to be greater conversation with all the providers, and they're coming up with these great ideas for their niche, but no one's actually looking and going, look at the end-to-end experience for a client. The people left doing that are the practices and the advisors who are busy trying to service their clients to be able to tie all those strings together.
And one of the questions we ask advisors is, how many pieces of technology do you use in the advice process? And what we've seen over the years is that's not decreasing, it's increasing. So it might be a CRM system, it might be an SOA system, it might be a feed from the platform, etc. So I've got all these pieces of technology I'm using. If they're not integrated, that's not a very efficient process.
Overwhelmingly, it's going to be licensed financial advisors that need to meet this challenge, that need to meet this demand, because under the structure of our law, they're really the only ones who can provide it. And even if it was a technology-based solution, it still needs to be a technology solution that fits into that narrow legal definition and is effectively providing advice under the law.
What technology can do is drive down the cost of providing advice. And it's doing that in other countries, and it can drive up the satisfaction that people have with advice, which is the frequency of contact, the anchoring of good wins, the anchoring of positive decisions, the reward for those things. But it will not replace, for those people seeking quality advice and certainly complex advice, the feeling that people get when they sit together and understand the problem and believe that someone's acting in their best interests.
I see sometimes people thinking that tech will solve this scaled problem. And so they've got all these tech solutions, budgeting things and other things. I think tech has its place, but I think it has to be done in a way with general advice. Or robo they think will have a solution, but if you don't have a general advice education element behind it, people don't take action. And so from what I've learned is people don't want tech unless it's got a personality or someone behind it. They trust a person.
We want technology to aid the discussion that a financial advisor has with a client and their specific goals, but we need some clarity from the regulator on what can be achieved with social media and general advice. And I really believe it is a case of 20th century legislation falling behind 21st century technology.
The advice industry is now a profession. The big opportunity here is for the advice industry itself. The different associations, individual advisors, licensees, product manufacturers actually need to come together and put some of the disagreements of the past behind them, because we all understand there is a big need for change. If we want to improve the affordability and accessibility of advice, we need to be speaking with one voice in a way that we never have in the past.
Perhaps we should have drawn a line down the sand and said you're either an independent financial advisor with all of the requisite experience that comes with that, and the objective, impartial advice that comes with that, or you're a financial product salesperson. We effectively took that off the table and we outlawed that business model, which seems rash when you look back in hindsight, given that there are a portion of Australians who would love advice, but perhaps what a lot of them need is access to a financial product.
The thing that regulators have to focus on is the best outcome for consumers. There's some complex solutions to this, but the biggest one that we ought to face into as an industry, and we've been relatively poor at this, is telling the story of advice and the transformation that takes place.
How do we actually turn over a blank page, forget about everything in the way we've done it, and just think differently? How do we say just because of the way we did it like that before doesn't mean we have to do it today?
We haven't invested enough in this industry to build the infrastructure for the industry of today that thinks about advice and the customer holistically. One of the problems with that is data. Key to that is actually having reliable data that those solutions can share. In some cases, the innovation is actually creating more work and more effort and making it harder for a financial planner to deliver outcomes. It's really targeted innovation and technology delivery that increases engagement, that increases reliability of data, that allows you to make better decisions. And I think that is across the board.
We need to explain to consumers the value of advice and the value that it can add to their lives. And we need to do a better job of that as well.
I think the opportunity is to see financial, not literacy, but engagement as a multi-layered thing. There's different ways and different things you can engage the public on, and formal financial advice via a licensed financial advisor is just one part. If we can start to think about one-to-many programs that are about cash flow behaviours, money behaviours, even Instagram influencers who are just talking about money, getting people to even care, there's layers of opportunity here that can assist the public. Well, I don't know what the figure is now, is it 17,000? However many there are of us can serve the entire Australian public is somewhat ludicrous, and it's not going to work. And I don't think we can turn the industry within a couple of years into double its size, which might be what it needs. I think we're going to have to find other ways to engage the public, and I think that's potentially a good thing. We're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to get a bit innovative, try things out, which is not something the industry's known for before. So I think it's going to force us all to try things to see how we can engage the public better.
So there's a couple of ways that advisors can use scale and deliver this one-to-many concept. And so if you can do something in a scaled way that doesn't require a lot of one-on-one, it can be used in a variety of ways. It can be used for those that can't afford your advice, for those that don't know what they don't know, or for those that, want to build up a little bit of trust before they take that next step. The other way that it can be used is it can be used in the more traditional financial advice world, where we have this quasi one-on-one and some scaled stuff done.
And so I think what needs to happen next is some form of loosening of the regulatory settings is required to attract the innovation, to attract the capital, to attract the talent back into the sector.
To support the availability and affordability and accessibility of advice, but actually making it more flexible in the way that people can perhaps access advice.
Licensees have to ask the question, what are we going to be when we grow up? Because they're going to have to do something completely different.
There is an amazing opportunity for this industry to build the foundations of the future, to deliver on the promise we have with consumers, to reduce friction in the way that we work with customers and advisors, to get technology and data to work together more seamlessly.
So if we ask our technology providers to actually come together as a group and consider the end-to-end experience for a client and how that comes together, you're actually making it much easier for a consumer to then engage with an advisor, more likely to move ahead post that engagement because that process is much more seamless.
As a consumer, I'm sorry, a 90-page legal document means nothing to me. I just want you, the advisor, to help me achieve my goals, to help me feel like I've received the value that you've delivered in our initial meetings. I'm not saying we throw compliance out, I'm just saying we need to press a reset on what we're doing as an industry because we're all professionals now.
So we need to be the ones that champion that cause of advisors. We can't expect the government or other people to do that. We have to be our own news story. And so I think sometimes as advisors, we just expect that somebody else should do it for us, but why aren't we doing that?
I think consumers as well, if they really do need help and if they really do want to create for their families and for themselves a more healthy financial life, then they should think about getting help in the same way that they are now willing to get help with their mental health or with their physical health in ways that we've never seen before.
A great outcome would be that we allow Australians to remove their retirement burden from the government by funding it themselves and give them the flexibility to make the choices that they want to make inside that. A great outcome would be to make sure that every Australian retires with enough and has the economic security to live happily for the rest of their life in a way which allows them to fulfil their needs fundamentally.
If we can change the system so that consumers can access advice at an affordable price point throughout all those stages, it will significantly improve quality of life for many, many Australians.
It has to have a purpose. And so to do that, we're going to have to remind ourselves of that purpose, and we all have an obligation to do that. If we think about the industry that was and the industry that has to be, we stand in a great position today about building the foundations for the future, and it's going to take all of us to play that part.
Really what we've got to think about and put at the centre of what we do across the licensee, the platform, the industry associations, etc., is the customer.
Because we won't have a sustainable profession if we're not able to deliver advice at a fair price and fair margin to the advisor who's delivering that.
If we can get all those layers right, then we won't be serving the small percent of the public. We'll be engaged with all of the Australian public because they'll all have their own ways they can connect with us.
As an industry, as a profession, we've got a big mountain to move. We've got a big perception mountain, we've got a big compliance mountain, we've got a cost mountain. But how can we collectively come together, keep coming together, and agreeing that our goal is for every Australian to have access to quality and affordable financial advice so they can leave a true financial legacy for the next generation.
So for me, helping someone with their financial life doesn't just help them, it helps their family, it helps their community, it helps the world at large, it helps the next generation. It has this ripple effect. And so as an advisor, to help with that, is a massive privilege. And I feel, really lucky that we get to have such, an amazing role in people's lives and in this, ripple effect that happens.